I'm Alyson Richman.
And I'm Shaunna J. Edwards, and you're tuned into Meet the Author with Rolling Out.
What is going on, everybody? My name is Malik Brown, here for Rolling Out, Meet the Author. And today, I'm not with just one author. I'm here with two authors this time. I am here with Ms. Alyson Richman and Shaunna Edwards. They are both the authors of the book, The Thread Collectors. How are you guys doing today?
We're doing great.
How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. You know, I got some good news before, y'all let me know that I was your first one, your first interview. So I feel special. So thank you for that. Yeah, I'm glad to be speaking with both of you today. I always start off when we do meet the author, I always, ask, what inspired you all to create The Thread Collector? Well, the book, but for you two, The Thread Collectors, what inspired you? Anybody can go, whoever, wants to. You both can go if you have two different inspirations, but, where did this all start?
Well, maybe I'll start, and then Alyson, you can add on.
Sure, absolutely.
Which is very similar to our writing process. We go back and forth. So Alyson and I come from two different heritages, two different cultures. I am a Black woman from the South, originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, where our book is set. And Alyson is a proud Jewish woman, grew up in the Northeast. And we spent a lot of our time over our decade-long friendship talking about how our heritage has shaped us, the way we respond to the world, the way we respond to literature, even the importance of stories in our various cultures. We started talking about a Civil War book back 6 years ago, I think it was.
Yeah,
and then a couple of years ago, during 2020, with the racial reckoning that was going on, we realized it was time to write this story. So The Thread Collectors is about two couples. One is Black, one is Jewish, and it takes place at the height of the Civil War in New Orleans. And really it's about how those lives intersect, but also how two very different marginalized communities navigate this really cataclysmic chapter in our history.
Alyson, did you have anything? Did you have another thing, a short thing to say? Or are you good?
Well, Shaunna is, such a beautiful speaker. So she, of course, summarized everything just so perfectly. I guess what I would just like to add is, this is a real, we always called it a legacy project, Shaunna and me. This is something that we felt really deeply about doing and doing it right. I remember when Shaunna and I met to discuss sort of teaming together to write this book. This is her first novel. It's her debut. It's going to be my 8th novel published in the United States. So I've been doing this for over 20 years. But, Shaunna is, as she mentioned, an avid reader. She was a literature major at Harvard, and our friendship has always been cemented on books. And we've been discussing, the idea of the Civil War book, as Shaunna mentioned, for over 6 years. But the timing really sort of crystallized, as she said, in the spring of 2020. And, we met on Juneteenth in Bryant Park during the throes of COVID. We peeled back our masks and we were like, can we do this? Can we write this proposal to sell this book, from these two lenses that have really not been explored in literature, to look at the Civil War, through a Jewish and a Black lens. It was going to be a really special project. But I just so remember feeling like we're not going to hold back on anything. We're going to write about the really difficult things. We're not going to, whitewash history. We're not going to try and make it more palatable for people so that they don't see the racial inequality that plagued the Union Army. People like to think that when enslaved men joined the Union ranks, that they were treated, equally as they fought for, to end slavery, and that was not the case. There was a very small percentage of Jewish soldiers who, enlisted, and they did suffer from anti-Semitism. And we wanted to, peel back the onion and really show the hardship of fighting for freedom.
Was there any other sort of inspiration for you all writing this book? Were you all inspired by any authors, any other books that you may have been reading through these 6 years that kind of, got you all up to kind of just come together and just finally, make the book?
So much. So both from our individual histories, but also the The books that we've read, everything from a seminal book like Roots, that's going to explore different layers of Blackness, different types of slavery, and that all figures into our book, to nonfiction books like The Things She Carried, because embroidery, just like embroidery is on Ashley Sack, that artifact that is held at the National Museum of African American Heritage and Culture in Washington, D.C., the types of resourcefulness that African Americans had, just that you learn around your kitchen table, right? There's a reason why Black people eat greens and Johnny hoe cakes and things like that, is because that was what was left to us. And all of those aspects we wanted to weave in. Now, I would say we probably have just as many pages of notes for our book as we have for the book itself. And I think we wanted to ensure that the texture was there, even if not every single historical point would made it into the book. But in particular, Alyson has a very, very interesting family story that inspired a couple of characters in the book. Maybe Alyson, you want to talk about your family lineage?
So I had been told since I was a little girl that our family that had emigrated from Germany to the United States in the mid 1800s was permanently divided at the time of, after the Civil War, due to the fact that my I had two great uncles who fought on opposite sides on the Civil War. So even though there were only 8,000 Jewish soldiers who enlisted, and that includes both the Union and the Confederacy, I happen to have two. So proportionally, that's kind of unusual. Now, on the Union side, Jacob Kling was one of my uncles who enlisted in the 31st Regiment of New York as a musician, while his brother Abraham enlisted in Mississippi. What we know about him, because obviously, as I mentioned, that the family sort of broke up during the Civil War and it never repaired itself, was that he joined as a sergeant. He ranked in as a sergeant and ranked out as a private. So he was a very bad soldier. But I do, need to admit that I do have a Confederate soldier on my family tree. And I really wanted to explore what happens within a family, a Jewish family, one that is a minority, against the backdrop of the Civil War, how two men who can take different positions on something as horrific as slavery, how that can impact a family permanently. And luckily, we had some really interesting resources to look at. Like, I was able to find photographs of the family homestead in Mississippi that we later learned had been occupied by General Grant's army during the Battle of Vicksburg. We use all the details about that house being created, the fact that it was built using borrowed slaves, which is pretty horrific, but we do put that bit of information into the book. And, for me, it was a way to explore something that I only knew from my grandmother, who passed away in 2016. There was, we knew that there had been, a family depot that was sort of an emporium that was created in Mississippi, and that had came about after the family had its own sort of mercantile emporio in New York. So, there were a lot of Jewish peddlers who actually went out west and towards the south in the early 19th century. And that was something that, my family roots are connected to. But again, we did not want to whitewash history. And so, we tried to explore the dynamics between these two brothers and what happens when they do choose to fight on opposite sides.
And, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think it's interesting because we have the privilege of looking at the Civil War almost as a moral matter because we're so far removed. But at the end of the day, then it was political and it was economic. And even now, when you look at groups of people, when you look at people of color and they're going out to the polls, for instance, and they're voting for people who might not seemingly have their best interest at heart, but maybe they're voting on the issue of religion or they're voting on the issue of economics, and folks are scratching their head wondering why. And it's because even then there wasn't just one way to be marginalized, right? In the Jewish community, there were people who were like, this is my economic shot. And I'm going to take it. And I think even now you see that play out in marginalized communities, people who are sometimes weighing solidarity against economics. And I'm not here to make a statement on which one should weigh out, but I think it's interesting that that hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm. And that's the privilege, I think, of writing historical fiction, is that we could explore things without taking, well, obviously we're completely horrified by slavery and take a position against slavery, but what happens with our characters and how they, you know, are played against the backdrop of history and their own personal home lives and what impact that has on their, you know, economics. It was something that was really interesting us to sort of play with and manipulate and also explore.
You know, it sounds like both of you have a lot of like experience, you know, just stories, experience to say, things to tell. So, but how are you all able to just put it in a book without, you know, it overflowing? Because, you know, like I said, this is my first time speaking with two authors of a book. But you know, usually one book, one author is kind of already long. But for you, you know, both of you seem like you have a lot of experience, a lot of things to say. How are you all able to come together and kind of just pack it all in, but you know, make it short and sweet?
Well, I
Yeah.
think one of, you know, one of the benefits for, you know, of this team that we created between Shaunna and myself is that um, I had the benefit of doing this for 20 years, knowing how to structure a novel and what was necessary in order to create, you know, basically a manuscript which is historically authentic, emotionally authentic, and also a page turner. I mean, no one wants to, you know, fall into a book that feels dusty and slow. And as you can tell, Shaunna and I have a tremendous amount of energy, and so we're fast thinkers. And I think we always like every chapter began with a brainstorming session, and that session was usually on a Sunday night where Shaunna and I would make time to chat and discuss what was going to happen first, you know, with the first chapter, and then we just sort of worked onwards, building from that. And you know, Shaunna has a full-time job at a law firm, and she's one of the most efficient, hardworking people I know, which really I think aided us, because it was like, okay, let's get to work and let's see what is this about. And there was no, you know, when I write a book by myself, there's a lot of inner pondering and taking long walks and thinking about it, where Shaunna can see the path through the trees very quickly, which was wonderful. So we would brainstorm these ideas. I might throw something out and she might shoot it down, or vice versa. But by the end of that conversation, we came up with what was going to happen plot-wise. Then I would spend the next 5 days sort of creating, and you know, I come from an artistic background, so I like to describe it as almost like a gesture drawing, where I would paint the scene in a very like loose, abstract way, often leaving pockets to say like, we need descriptions of New Orleans here, and we need some dialogue, you know, with, you know, and the great thing about a Google Doc is you could make notes in the margin. And then I would hand everything to her off on the Friday. She would work all weekend to finish, you know, what she needed to do. And then we would start again on Sunday, and it would just be, you know, it would build from that way. And then there would be, you know, points when, you know, Shaunna might have a vacation or a, you know, a long weekend, where then we would start reading all the way again from the beginning. And it was always this constant refining and adding and having conversations of what needed to be built in. Or, you know, there were many times where, you know, Shaunna would, you know, I might write something and she would say, I think we need to discuss this. And we would discuss the character and whether the character really would have made those choices. And then she would redo it because it wasn't right. And so it became, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but please correct me, that we almost became like one when we were working in this. Like we really sort of, you know, merged together so that the manuscript became this entity between us that we were constantly shaping and refining until it reflected what our intention was in writing the book.
I think that's absolutely correct. I will say there was one other essential quality that we needed, and that is radical transparency and honesty. It is challenging to write a book from your different perspectives, particularly at a time where race is very much at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. And then we're writing about the Civil War, one of the most racialized incidents in history. And we made an agreement when we were sitting in Bryant Park, like we were going to be upfront and honest. And if there was something that someone put on the page and it didn't land right, offended you, reflected something that they didn't know about your heritage, you know, you could pull the ripcord and say, stop, we need to talk about this, not only for the purposes of the story, but we need to talk about this for our relationship. Like we can't go forward unless
And our
we're
growth, like our personal growth.
to be brutally honest about what we're feeling in this moment as a Black woman, as a Jewish woman writing this book.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I always talk about this moment that we met on Juneteenth, and we were talking about the horror of seeing George Floyd brutally murdered, on television, and seeing that. And I said, I was raised to be colorblind, Shaunna. And I meant it with such sincerity. And Shaunna looked at me and said, we can't write this book if you're colorblind. You must see my color. And it was such a moment where I was like, I had misused that. I had just misrepresented my heart, but I also was learning from her of this sense of, yes, in order to write this book, I had to acknowledge her color, her history, and always be open to learning more. And if there was something that I might have written that was, wrong or in error, that I need to learn why. Like, why did I even write that to begin with? There's an example in the book that I think we always refer to, where there was a little Black girl who is pointing in the direction and towards, I don't want to give away the plot, but something where she possesses knowledge about where one of the characters is. And I had, that the other character was listening to this, who was white, was surprised. And Shaunna said to me, why is she surprised? I don't want it to be surprising that the little Black girl has this knowledge and that she's smart. And I was like, you're absolutely right. But I had written it this way, and it was corrected. And I also learned from that conversation we had. And so as we were refining and building this book, I was also getting a very important education, so it was just wonderful.
As was I, the education in both ways.
So we both feel smarter and more sensitive, I think, to each other's heritage, having finished this novel, and we want to do more. So
absolutely.
That's amazing to hear, and it just sounds like as you all were writing this book, as you all were you were communicating how you felt, while still just continue to grow at the same time. And I want to ask, what message do you want to give to the readers that are the people that are reading this book? Like, what's the message that you all want to get across? Because you guys learned a lot. What do you want the readers to learn?
Well, I'll go first, and maybe Alyson, you can add on. For me, it's important that when we think about moments like the Civil War, that we don't describe history as something that happened to Black people, where we are not agents in our own story. The Black couple that's at the heart of our story, William, who's a musician who escapes to join the Union Army, and Stella, his lady left behind, she has her own way of helping out people reaching freedom. And that's important, right? Like, we are the authors of our own story. We may have limited means sometimes. It may feel like we have limited power, but we do have a lot of agency, and it's important to remember that, honor that our ancestors, gave up so much for us to be here, but also to take that forward in everyday life. And then the second thing I would say is, these conversations across race, across religion, across genders, across sexual orientation, they can be difficult, but if you can find a common purpose, it can be so rewarding, and it really can remove a lot of the obstacles that we put in our own way to building deeper relationships. So that's what I've learned from me and Alyson working together. And I hope you can also learn that from the book based on the friendships that ignite.
Yes, I think that was beautifully put. So I suppose, just to add on to that, I mean, for me, when creating this novel with Shaunna, I think our intention very much was to create a book that was, historically accurate and showed, this horrific time in history and what was happening. But at the same time, to illuminate that there's often certain, threads that connect us rather than dividing us. And having both a Black musician and a Jewish musician, their lives entwining in this unexpected friendship, was really this wonderful way to show the common bond between humanity, and also how art can often transcend all this, hardship and brutality that is around us, that two men from, as Shaunna said, coming from different backgrounds, different religion, culture, economics, can find a common ground with music. And I think so when I look back, hopefully as an old woman, at this project that I did with Shaunna, for me it's about showing what unites us rather than what divides us. Of course, we are showing the divisiveness of what was happening in the United States at that time period, but at its core, it's about putting heart into history, right? A beating heart, and I think that's what I wanted to do with this novel.
Love that, love that. So I want to get into the book cover. Because the book cover says a lot. It's, of course, two women. but you can't see their faces. You can't see their faces. And of course, their clothing, yellow. Is that what? Yeah, right there. I'm
In
looking
case
at it on my
anyone
phone,
needs to see it, here it is.
yeah, that's right. So I won't be explaining, but yeah, what went into creating that book cover? How did you all come together to make this? And is there any meaning? Is there any meaning in that book cover?
That's a great question. So, Shaunna, why don't you take this? Because I know there was a lot of discussion on the.
Absolutely. There is so much meaning. And I will say, as a debut novelist, I don't know how I thought book covers came together, but I did not think it was as complex as it ultimately was. But it was a lot of fun. So I discussed the fact that we have two couples, one Black, one white. The two women on the cover, there are heroines. The Black woman's named Stella. That's also my mom's name. So shout out to the OG Stella. And there's also Lily, who is described to look a little bit like Alyson, if I do say so myself. We wanted to show these two women whose lives intertwined, but they don't know it yet at the beginning of the novel, back to back. Once again, thinking about those connections that Alyson just thought. These two women in two different places that might not think they had anything in common, but through the friendship of their beloveds on the battlefield have a lot in common. Also, color plays a lot in the book because there are textiles, there are threads. If you've ever been in New Orleans, you know it's a colorful city, right? So the Union Army, the blue of the hope and the freedom that's coming. So we really wanted to ensure that the cover was colorful. So we were very kind of vigilant about the colors that were going to be used. We wanted to make them bright. We did want to ensure that the clothing was historically accurate. And then I will say that the last thing that we really thought quite a bit about was, this was me, skin tone. So Stella in the book, she is of mixed parentage. She is the product of a Black enslaved woman and her owner. And she is described as being obviously lighter than her mother, but darker than some. I grew up in a very color focused city. New Orleans still is plagued with colorism. And in fact, during the 1800s, there was a Black code that basically gave you different rights depending on the shade that you were. So we talked a lot with our publisher, shout out to the Graydon House and HarperCollins team, about what Stella should look like. Because for me, while she is described as an object of beauty and desire, it was important for me that she not be so light, bright, so cafe au lait that she wasn't recognized as a Black woman, because being a Black woman really informs her journey. So I think we had to work quite a bit, but we ultimately found wonderful models. We love the clothing that they're wearing. It's so eye-catching. And we just, that red thread that connects, just what Alyson said, that's the heart, right? That heart of love and all of it that we're trying to put into history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they did a really great job, because it was not an easy feat. And I think, the intention, I think, of not showing their full face is so that readers can identify and sort of think it could be them, it could be anyone, it could be their great-great-grandmother, and you don't see a specific features that sort of make it so that when you're reading the book, you're focused on a particular face. It enables you to open up the page and fall into the way we describe the characters and use your imagination to see how you would envision them, which I like.
That, like I said, just looking at it, the cover looks pretty deep. So I had to ask that.
Well, that's good. We didn't want it not to look deep.
It did its job. We love it. Thank you.
Some gravitas, so thank you, Melissa.
Definitely. So wrapping up, guys. I want to say this was amazing. But I have one last question. So Miss Alyson, you said this is your 8th or 9th novel. This is your 9th?
This is my 8th. I have a 9th coming out in May. This will be my 8th published in the United States. I have another novel that was just recently published abroad. That's why it's actually my 9th that I've written, but my 8th coming out in the United States.
Okay, so we're gonna say 8th. We're gonna say 8th. What did you learn through this 8th, through this number 8? What have you learned through this one?
Well, I've learned so much because, actually before I began writing this book with Shaunna, I knew almost nothing about the Civil War. And we did such a deep dive into trying to, read everything we could and meet with, academics. Shaunna traveled to Port Hudson to do some of the research and would make these very in-depth, notes of when she met with the ranger there and all the details from that. And so for me, it was learning about a period of history that I knew very, very little about. Also learning how much of the Black perspective and the Black history angle was never taught in my classes at school. I mean, one of the things that Shaunna and I recently have been discussing, and we profile it in our book, is the burning of the colored orphan asylum in New York during the draft riots in July 1863. So things like that were, from my personal education, I feel like it was always like up north was good and and south was bad with slavery, and that was not the case. As the case in so much in history, there's a lot of shades of gray, and there's a lot of history that has been erased and that needs to be illuminated. So for me, it was finding those bits of information that shocked me, and I wanted to make sure they were in our book so that our readers learn about them, not in such a didactic way that it feels like they're reading a history book, but that they're wrapped up in the characters and how the characters explain what history is going on around them. So to make a book in which people are pulled into the love story, the journey of these four characters, but come away really feeling like they've learned so much more about history than they knew. And we're reading a lot of the early reviews, and I actually smile greatly when they say this book pulls no punches, or pulls a lot of, what's the expression, like it doesn't shy away from the horrors of what was happening at this time period with slavery, with anti-Semitism. And it sometimes is a difficult read, but hopefully a really powerful read. To me, that's what we set out to do.
And Shaunna, this debut, right? Debut?
Yes, it is my debut. That is a hard question, but maybe for me it boils down to something simple. This is a dream of mine, to have a novel, and I cannot thank Alyson enough, not only for her friendship, our 10 years plus worth of friendship, but for having the trust in me to take me on this journey. I would say that everyone has a story worth telling. You can really get it into your head that certain paths, certain goals are not for you, that people only want to hear from certain types of voices, or that you don't have enough time, or you don't have enough money, or you don't think you're educated enough, or you don't think that you know enough about a topic. But for me, this journey was like, everyone has a story worth telling. And if it's a goal of yours, go to the library, do the research, pull out the letters, just start, and you would be so surprised what happens. And that's not necessarily as profound as what Alyson said, but for me, it has been life-changing.
I would agree. It's definitely a life-changing experience. And also, I think it's strengthened our friendship in such a wonderful way. Like I love Shaunna from the minute I met her 10 years ago, but I have such a deep respect to her, even deeper respect for her now, knowing how much she juggled to make this book happen. I mean, this is, Shaunna's working, as I said, a full-time job. And, I never once was waiting on anything. Like if I asked her to get back to me on something or make time so we could discuss something, she always did. And it just felt like we were a super team. So I feel very grateful.
Oh,
it's a love fest. We love each other.
Thank you, Malik. And we hope you love the Thread Collector.
Yes, we hope you love the Thread Collector.
Right. And also, I appreciate both of you for coming on and speak with me about this book. I hope, a lot of people go out and they listen to this and, they go and grab the book for sure. So I want to personally say thank you both for coming on, making the time to talk with us. You both were amazing.
Oh, thank you, Malik, and thank you for rolling out, for hosting our first interview for this book. And we're so excited to share it with your community and your readers.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Always, the pleasure is ours. Before we go, if you both have social media or anything, this is your time to let the people know where they can find you and also where they can find the book as well.
Well, hopefully you'll be able to find the bookstore throughout the country. I mean, the book throughout the country at your local independent bookstore, at Amazon, Barnes and Noble. It should be widely available. And you can find me at Alyson Richman on Instagram and on Facebook. Just my name, Alyson Richman author. And Shaunna?
You can find me on Instagram at Shaunna J Edwards with an S, and on Facebook at Shaunna J Edwards author.
Well, you guys heard it here first. Thank you both, Miss Alyson and Miss Shaunna, for coming on again, speaking with us, and continue to uplift, continue to shine, and we hope to see more books from both of you.
Oh,
thank you so much,
Malik. Thank you for a wonderful interview.
Always, always. Thank you all for listening. This is Rolling Out Meet the Author. My special guests, Miss Alyson, Miss Shaunna, Thread Collectors, authors, and we are out.